In this session, I want to look at some interrelated histories: the history of geography, the history of geopolitics, and the history of geography and war. Any history of geography should start with Eratosthenes. We know quite a lot about Eratosthenes' great innovations. We know that he developed a means of identifying prime numbers, which we call the sieve of Eratosthenes. We also know that he was the first person to measure the circumference of the Earth, and to do it relatively accurately. And from our perspective, we know that he founded the field of geography, or geographia, Earth description. But unfortunately, his works on geography were lost with the destruction of the Library of Alexandria. We can infer some of what he wrote from later writers, but we don't know directly what he wrote on geography, as no copy survived. A later author who does make reference to Eratosthenes, though, is Strabo, and his great work, Geographica, did survive. We'll look at him in coming weeks, as he has some interesting things to say on mountains and rugged terrain. On the history of geopolitics, first of all, what is geopolitics? Bowman says it's a pseudoscience. Brock says it's a pseudoscience. Freeman says it's pseudo-scientific. Morgenthau says it's a pseudoscience. Have I made the point clearly enough? Geopolitics is a pseudoscience. Stop using the word. Stop it now! But we need to know a bit more about what geopolitics is. Our starting point is this chap, Friedrich Ratzel. Ratzel gave us two great works, Anthropogeography and Politische Geography. Ratzel originally thought that his Anthropogeography couldn't be translated from German into English, as the English mind was wired so differently to the German that it just wouldn't make sense. That should give you some insight into Ratzel's mind. But eventually, Ratzel relented and gave the task of translating his great work to one of his students, an American called Ellen Churchill Semple. This translation was a task she never really finished. She translated most of it, and augmented bits of it with her own anthropological fieldwork in the Appalachian Mountains. But she deliberately removed one key bit of Ratzel's work, a bit that she found to be a distraction and something that the rest of the book didn't need. I'll come back to that key bit in a moment. Another of Ratzel's students, this time from Sweden, took the exact opposite view to Semple. Rudolf Kjellén felt that this bit that Semple had missed was actually the most important bit of Ratzel's work, and even coined a term for it. This key thing that Semple disagreed with and Kjellén thought was most important was simple. Ratzel argued that the state was an organism. Kjellén took Ratzel's idea that the state was an organism, and from it developed the theory which he called geopolitics. So, one of the tenets of geopolitics is that the state is an organism. Well, this is a little bit dangerous. If we regard the state as an organism, then we expect it to behave as an organism, doing the things that organisms do. So, is the state an organism? What are the things that organisms do? Well, a long time ago when I did biology at school, I was taught that living organisms have 7 characteristics. They reproduce, feed, respire, grow, excrete, move, and are sensitive. Do states reproduce? Perhaps. Some of the former colonial powers exported their forms of government to some of their colonies. That could be regarded as a form of reproduction. Do states feed? Well, they certainly use a lot of resources, and those resources don't always come from within their own boundaries. Do they respire? Well, they don't literally breathe, but they do emit a lot of carbon. Do they grow? Well, in various points in history, some states have grown by taking on more territory. But if that territory was previously part of another state, then for one state to grow, another has to get smaller. Do states excrete? States do produce a lot of waste, and many states choose to send that waste to the other side of the planet. Do they move? Well, here's one state as an organism, Poland, before 1939, and here's Poland after 1945. Poland has certainly moved. It's moved west. Are states sensitive? Well, actors within states at various levels have some form of awareness of the international system and the states that surround them. So, what do they do with that information? Well, that's another matter, but they are at least aware of it. So for the 7 characteristics of living organisms, we have 7 potential yeses. If you wanted to, and you took all 7 with a pinch of salt, you could argue that the state is an organism. For those who accept geopolitics as a legitimate form of study, the state is indeed an organism. In the run-up to and during the Second World War, this belief was very appealing to some scholars in Germany and Japan. If a state is an organism, then it will do that 4th thing I identified: it will grow. Indeed, if a state is an organism, then it needs to grow. It's entirely natural for it to do so. We should expect it to grow, because that's what organisms do. We would be wrong to prevent it from doing so, and we should feed it to help it grow. With this simple idea, we have the intellectual justification for the living space arguments, what the Germans in the Second World War referred to as Lebensraum, and the Japanese referred to as Saikatsuken. By saying that the state is an organism, we have given academic justification for German and Japanese annexation in the Second World War. The man with whom that academic justification was chiefly associated, at least in Germany, is Karl Haushofer, and we'll look at him in the next session.